All right, welcome into another Auburn Live show. Appreciate everybody for joining us on this Monday morning. I am Justin Hokanson from AuburnLive.com. Make sure you're part of that website. If you're not, go subscribe. $10 for the next year. So go take advantage of that. Part of the On3 Sports Network, AuburnLive.com. With me, as always, every Monday morning, former Auburn quarterback Ben Leard. Ben, what's happening?
Not much, Hope. How you doing, buddy?
Good, man. Good. Ready to get back to some action. Auburn with the bye week. Got to watch a little bit of football. Got to sort of take a little bit of a break. But ready to get back at it this week. How was your weekend?
Man, it was great. Enjoyed the Pope's Haunted Farm over the weekend with about 16 or 17 teenagers. So life of dad, man. We didn't do much. The good thing is you didn't have to suffer through a potential Auburn loss. Bad thing is you didn't have to you didn't get the chance to celebrate an Auburn win. So, but bye weeks are not only good for players, they're good for fans as well.
Yeah, yeah, I would say so. I was kind of bummed though, man, because it's like we have a bye week, and so for me, I'm thinking, all right, I get a day to watch football, and the slate was like a C. I mean, it was like, really, this is the slate of games I get on my one off week. The best game was like, I mean, Oklahoma State, Iowa State. It was like the best game I got. A little disappointed in
Yeah,
that.
it was pretty lackluster. I mean, I don't know. I, I may have watched. And I tell you what, the only football I watched yesterday was the tail end of the Illinois Penn State game. That was it. That was the only ball I watched the entire day, which was totally fine with me because, like you said, it just you know Alabama Tennessee lost its luster years ago. Obviously Georgia and Florida were off. Clemson, Pitt, big deal. It just they're just the games weren't there, and so I took advantage of doing chores and hanging out with the fam.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we're back at it. Let's jump right into Auburn-Ole Miss. Auburn moves up in the polls. I think they're 18th and 19th in both the polls. Ole Miss moves into the top 10. I think they're number eight and number 10 in both polls after their win over LSU. I watched a good bit of that game. Um, LSU, I mean, they hung in there for about a quarter, and then it just got ugly. Um, what's our early take? Well, I tell you what. Before we get into this game, before we started recording, I was talking about how I was actually at the Auburn Ole Miss game in 2000 in Oxford. I was also there in '02. It's actually one of my more fun trips growing up, going to Oxford. Partly because Auburn had some nice wins, but I was there in 2000, 2002, 2004. Um, all Auburn wins in Oxford, and have I can't remember when the last time I was back, but I remember those games. Of course, 2000, you were there in that SEC West championship season, and I remember a 4th and 3 or something like that, and Rudy bounced it out and took it to the house to kind of help seal the deal. But that was a classic game. What do you remember about some Auburn Ole Miss games and that game in particular?
Man, that one in particular, a couple of things I recall. One, it was one of the hottest games I've ever played in because it was back in the day, man. That was usually our first SEC game,
Yeah,
maybe two, 3 games into the season. So you're still playing in September, and going over to Oxford was, man, it was hot. But they had some squads back then, man, led by Romero Miller, Deuce McAllister, Joe Gunn. They had a big tight end named Rufus French. I mean, linebacker named Mark Regis Spearman. I mean, they got after it, and that was back when Coach David Cutcliffe was the head coach at that particular time, and he had those guys dialed in. They played hard. They ran the football. Obviously, they were super, super physical. Matt Luke wasn't one of the offensive linemen, as you guys, everybody's familiar with. But in that particular game, I was telling you the story. I remember that game, a couple of things out of that game. I remember early on, we, again, like you said, we went for it on several fourth downs. I mean, I think I converted myself probably 3 or 4 fourth and ones, fourth and twos on a quarterback sneak. But one of my most fond memories that thankfully Cole was wrong, but in that ball game, we punted to Ole Miss early on. It may have been the first or second quarter, but we punted to Ole Miss, and obviously, even as big as Deuce was, he was an unreal punt returner. He catches the punt, gets to about our 30-yard line, and over the loudspeaker, they start playing Crazy Train. And Cole Kubelik and I were standing side by side watching this unveil or unravel, for lack of a better term. And he says, man, we are about to get our asses beat. And thankfully he was wrong, because it was insane. And it was going nuts. Because if one of the bigger dramatic thoughts about that game was that was Coach Tubbs' first trip back to Oxford. So
Right.
That was the big soap opera, a big deal then, to, what made that game and built that game up. The other thing that I remember is going into that game, Tubbs was known as the riverboat gambler, right? He rolled the dice on a lot of instances. I wasn't necessarily dialed into what all he had going on in that particular game, but I'll remember when we drove down after maybe one or two possessions, we drove down and scored. I think I threw a touchdown pass. I think I threw the touchdown pass to Rudy, actually. As I'm coming off the field, Tubbs grabs me and goes, "Hey man, don't go far." And I'm like, "What? Why?" He's like, we're fixing to get it back. We're doing an onside kick. And I'm thinking, holy smokes, this is crazy. And sure enough, we got the onside kick, drove down. I think we maybe kicked a field goal and went up 10-0 fairly early, and just held on, man. I mean, it was a really, really good game. I mean, I got a lot of fond memories of Ole Miss. Ole Miss cost me a lot of games my junior season in Auburn due to a separated shoulder. But even as a freshman, that was one of the few games that was the only SEC game we won in '98 over there in Oxford. And Auburn's had some big wins in Oxford over the last several years, for sure. It's turned into a much larger game than people realize, especially with the amount of talent. And, everybody for the last several years has kind of been playing catch up to Alabama, obviously, on a consistent basis. And what's made these games so big, the Ole Miss game, the Arkansas game, the LSU games, because by not winning those games, you put yourself 2 and 3, potentially 4 games behind whomever may be the benchmark at that particular time. And for Auburn, in order to keep the Iron Bowl with some type of postseason relevance, these are absolute must-win games for the Tigers. And it will not be an easy feat come Saturday when they line up in Jordan-Hare.
Yeah, I was thinking back. I think that 2000 game, I think it was like 31-27 or something. Auburn winning that game, and you're right. It had that extra juice because of the Tommy Tuberville factor. Them coming in Auburn his first season, winning. They felt good about that for a year, and then coming back against a good Ole Miss team and winning that game was definitely some nice payback for Tuberville. But you're right. That's funny that this game it was always like the first conference game. I mean, it was set. And it's why I'd have to go back, but I remember for a while, there was some stats and stuff where like, it was like, I don't know how many years it had been since Auburn had started 0-1 or since Ole Miss had started. Well, yeah, because they always played each other in the beginning and Auburn generally won. So Auburn always got off to a good start in conference, and Ole Miss always got off to an 0-1 start. But you're right. I'm looking back. Let's see. Ole Miss. I mean, Auburn's owned this rivalry lately. Ole Miss won in 2015 in Auburn, which was Chad Kelly and Ole Miss. Good team. I I'd have to go back and look. That's probably one of those years they made the Cotton Bowl or something. They won by 8. And then, of course, Ole Miss beat Auburn in Oxford in 2012, which is a horrendous year for Auburn. But other than that, Auburn's taking care of business. So they've won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They've won 7 of the last 8 meetings between these two teams. Been some close games. Last year, obviously, we remember Seth Williams and the big touchdown late. The year before that in Auburn, it was 20-14. Auburn had that game in control, and Ole Miss hung around. That was a really sloppy game. But there've been some competitive games. This one will be like that. This one makes me think of, because Ole Miss has got that kind of season going, makes me think of 2003 when Ole Miss rolled in with Eli Manning, and that was kind of Auburn's back and forth year, like couldn't quite get it figured out. It has that feel a little bit. I don't know if that's just because Ole Miss isn't this good every year, and so when they are, it feels like their year, if that makes sense. That's kind of what it feels like. It feels like Ole Miss has got something brewing. It feels like it's kind of their year. Their defense has played better lately. And they're coming into Auburn. Auburn's kind of maybe surprising people a little bit. Like, okay, if they could pull this off, Auburn's going to be, a surprise of the league and maybe one of the teams in the country getting some talk if they pull this off. But it feels like Ole Miss has more to play for. I guess because they got one loss, they're sitting inside the top 10. And so it's an interesting dynamic. Auburn coming off a bye week, which is much needed and huge, gives them, extra time to prepare for a team like Ole Miss. Ole Miss has played Tennessee, which was a grueling game, Arkansas the week before, which was a grueling game, LSU, Matt Corral has been a little banged up. Like Ole Miss comes in like they need one more gutsy effort, I think, before they get a bye. So I don't know. Like, what do you make of who maybe has an advantage? The common sense might say Auburn because of a bye, but Ole Miss has got they're coming off a really nice performance in LSU. They're
Yeah.
coming in with a lot of confidence. Like, so is it momentum versus the bye? How do you sort of?
I've always been one that if in fact you are not just decimated by injuries, which Ole Miss, I mean, you can tell they've obviously played a number of SEC ball games. So I'm sure they're nicked up, they're bruised up, which is understandable. But I've always been a proponent of momentum. I've always been a proponent of, while the train's moving, keep it rolling. And so I honestly think it's going to be more difficult for Auburn coming off the bye week to try and replicate the momentum that they had against Arkansas. To be able to do that on such short notice, for lack of a better term. Whereas Ole Miss has traveled to Knoxville, won that particular game in close fashion, but they showed that they could win a game on the road at night in a very hostile environment. And then they had a really strong performance versus LSU. Now, how much effort did they get out of LSU? I think that remains to be seen, and there's a lot of question marks surrounding that. But it's still a win against a very talented football team. But and we talk about, and you made the comment about who has more to play for or really more to lose. I don't know. You can honestly say at this point, when it comes down to, just the optics of it, you could say out of the gate that Ole Miss has more to lose in the scenario. But realistically, Hope, Auburn does have 2 losses, but one of those is to Penn State, that it's irrelevant with regards to the SEC. And so, at this point, they're both playing with one SEC loss and playing pretty darn well. So I think it's one of those things that it's a huge moment, a huge game for both of them, because it keeps their aspirations still in sight. It keeps their goals still intact from the standpoint of postseason aspirations, because either team, and I truly believe this, that either team, if in fact they win out, especially Auburn, if Auburn wins out, they obviously go to the SEC championship game. If Ole Miss wins out, I'm not sure how that would work, because you could potentially have, it would be them versus Alabama essentially with one loss. So it would still be Alabama that would go, right? Because
Right.
A&M's out of the picture, because they've got two SEC. They would have three SEC losses due to Auburn winning out, and then they're out of the picture. So both scenarios, or both teams, are well on their way with regards to what they started the season with from a standpoint of postseason. So I think this will be, man, in my opinion, this is going to be the largest, the most hyped up, biggest Ole Miss versus Auburn game anybody has ever seen, because of this is a really good Ole Miss football team. They're really good, especially offensively. They are super talented, and Matt Corral is a gamer. And defensively, they're spurty. They come up with. I think their philosophy on defense is cause your opponent's offense to punt twice, three times maybe. You do that, before you know it, you're down 17 to Matt Corral in that offense, and you're putting that the opponent's offense in a difficult spot, kind of getting out of character. And so it just adds on. Very, very similar, not from a talent perspective, but very similar to how Alabama plays. They know that if they put the ball in the hands of their offense more times than not causing turnovers, things like that, but just make a team punt. Our offense is that good that we will score points and we will put it out of reach. And I think that's the philosophy that Ole Miss has this season with such a prolific offense.
Yeah, I agree. Just to play devil's advocate, I would probably say the 2014 Auburn-Ole Miss game is the biggest that I remember. Auburn at that point was there. I think they were both top five. That was Ole Miss's year. That Ole Miss and Mississippi State both at one point were like 1-3. And Auburn had beaten Kansas State. Auburn hadn't fallen off the wagon yet. They beat Ole Miss in that classic game where they forced a couple of fumbles against Ole Miss late. And then Auburn loses to Georgia, Bama bowl game, and it went downhill. But this is up there. I mean, even in 2015, Auburn wasn't good. I mean, I don't know what their record was, but Auburn wasn't that good that year, right? Probably not as good as this team is. And then you go back to 2003 when Ole Miss was really good. Auburn was, kind of bouncing around that year. That was a decent Auburn team. They just couldn't put it together. But you bring up a good point. I mean, about who to play for or who has the most to play for, because you would think Ole Miss top 10, but you're actually right. Forget the rankings. They both have a loss in the conference. Auburn still has Alabama on the schedule and A&M. Ole Miss doesn't have Alabama on the schedule. I mean, the winner of this game, like Auburn has a better chance to potentially win the division. Ole Miss, you got to hope Alabama loses again.
Right.
And which obviously if Auburn could potentially do that, Ole Miss could win this game and Auburn could upset Alabama in the Iron Bowl and who knows, but you're right. I mean, Auburn has every bit as much to play for as Ole Miss. It's just, I guess it's whether or not you think they believe that. Like Ole Miss is thinking this, like we're not. Ole Miss isn't used to this kind of season. They're 6-1. They're 8th in the country. This isn't a usual thing. So I'm wondering if they're coming in thinking we're having a special year, whereas Auburn's coming in thinking next game. Like, I'm kind of wondering if the Auburn team realizes, like, do they really understand? Do they really believe that they control their own destiny? It's a good talking point, and it's true.
Yeah.
But do they believe it yet? Like, I think they will if they beat Ole Miss. But do you see what I'm saying? Like, I think this is Auburn's chance to go, oh, okay. Like, if they do it now, I'll start like a couple weeks ago when that started coming up about Auburn controlling. I was like, okay, I mean, yeah, technically, but come on, let's not really. They win Saturday, then you go, okay. I mean, A&M's playing great ball now, of course, and you got to go there. But now you're going, okay, like now there's something there. So that's a fair, very fair point in terms of
Yeah.
who has the most to play for and who's going to have that passion and it feels like Ole Miss's year, but
And
it very much could feel like Auburn's year too. I mean,
I think it's a situation too. I began to feel that way after the Arkansas game. That some these kids, and I'm certain of it. I'm certain that these coaches are, they're talking about the 1-0 mentality. I understand that, but I'm certain that there is someone that is counseling these kids and having them understand, you know, kind of the forest for the trees, having them understand, guys, what's at stake if you do not win this game, or what is the benefit of winning this game. And
right,
I don't know, in my opinion, I don't know that I think Ole Miss is in a situation of this is a special year. I think the opposite, quite frankly.
hmm.
I think the pressure and the stress of being number 8 in the country, and everybody's in your ear about your Heisman winning quarterback, and you're on the road in a hostile environment. You're dealing with a coach that is, and I'm a Lane Kiffin guy. I believe in Lane Kiffin. I like him as a head football coach, but he's a sideshow. And I just, I think in that instance, while Auburn has not been just burning the doors off of everything over the last handful of years, these kids have been in these moments. These kids, the kids on Auburn's sidelines and in Auburn's locker room have played in these big games. They've competed in these big games. They've done the things that I just don't think Ole Miss is familiar with on a week in and week out basis. That's why I think it gives Auburn a little bit of a leg up. I think it gives them that scenario of, hey, we can get back to the grassroots of being 1-0 and understand that, yeah, while this is pomp and circumstance and this is a big game, we still got to line up and buckle our chin straps and, tie our shoelaces and get after it. And, nobody's going to give the game to Matt Corral. Nobody's going to give the game to Bo Nix. They've got to go out and earn it and make the plays that they're capable of making. But I think the propensity of these Ole Miss players and this Ole Miss football team to potentially not live up to the number 8 ranking in the country, I think that's more likely than them suddenly believing that they're a team of destiny. I just don't.
Yeah,
I don't know. I think I think that if they win this game, if they beat Auburn at home at night, if they beat A&M, then you can start then internally they can start making those kind of notations and comments and putting that out there as, hashtag destiny or whatever they want to say. But I think this is still one that it's not familiar territory for them. And I think it's
yeah,
one that's maybe gonna cause some problems at some point, hopefully this weekend.
yeah. That's fair. That's fair. I watched that game against LSU and man, they just started to turn it on against LSU in the second half, and I thought to myself, man, that's not what Auburn needs as a team coming in with that kind of confidence. I would say, look, let's talk about matchups a little bit and kind of just how this is going to play out on the field. Well, I want to make more and more comment. I agree with you because I didn't get a chance to agree with you earlier on the momentum versus the rest. I'm with you on that. I think the bye week it can be awesome. but when you're coming off a game like Auburn, you played really well. If they'd have come home the next week, like that would have been fine too. And so I'm kind of with you on that. I think Brian Harson's record's pretty good off the bye week. I don't know it offhand, but I remember seeing it somewhere, and it's pretty good.
And
And so I may
and
ask him
how
about that actually, and ask him like what his thoughts are on momentum. And then
let
you have
me
a bye, you have a pause. How do you sort of get that going again?
so let me before you jump into the next topic. So
Yeah.
the the one thing I will say, and you made a really good comment about how well Ole Miss played against LSU. And going back, and I watched a handful of the cut ups late last night, early this morning or whatnot, and saw how well one they ran the football. I mean, I don't think Corral. I think Corral maybe was 12 of 19 for 185 yards, something like that. He didn't have a tremendous day through the air. Snoop ran the ball extremely well, made some unbelievable runs, but we have to take into account the amount of effort that LSU potentially was playing with. Man, I do not. If things, you go into a game, regardless of what you got going on in the locker room, you go into a game in the first quarter and things are going good and you're all hyped up. I mean, we did it when we were 3-8, but when things begin to go downhill, it's okay. Well, here we go again. That's what happened in that game. That's, yes, Ole Miss, they competed, they made the plays they were supposed to make. I don't want to take anything away from them, but I do think that those good plays were compounded by Ole Miss just saying hell with it and giving you whatever, that whatever type effort. Watching Auburn over the last several weeks, watching how hard they played against LSU, even in the loss against Georgia, I don't think I saw any quit come out of those kids. How hard they played against Arkansas. I don't think that's a challenge that Auburn's going to face against Ole Miss. If Ole Miss has success, it's not going to be from or compounded by lack of effort. You're still going to get some fight out of the kids on Saturday, regardless of how well Ole Miss does or doesn't play. So, I think that's one of those things that I put a little bit of an asterisk by LSU's performance against anybody for the rest of the year, honestly.
Yeah, that's fair. When we look forward to this game, obviously Matt Corral comes in. He can't be 100%. I mean, there was questions whether he was going to play against LSU. He played well, didn't run a lot. So I think that's one positive for Auburn is he's still a great player and he's still going to be a problem. But I would think that his mobility is not going to be 100%. Maybe it's 80. Just in terms of it. So if Auburn can get after him a little bit, maybe he's a little shy to run as much. He might be trying to avoid contact, and that might help Auburn versus him just taking off and being super aggressive at running the ball. We know Ole Miss is going to score points. They're prolific enough, and we know Auburn's had issues giving up big plays, so that's going to be a big concern. Is Auburn's secondary? They did an okay job, a better job against Arkansas. Actually, they didn't give up really big plays against Arkansas. They gave up a lot of 10, 15-yard plays. They didn't give up any 20, 30-yard plays. That's going to have to continue. I would think Auburn's defense is going to have to do something similar in terms of give up some, but make some fourth down stops. Kiffin's going to go for some, make some stops the way they did against Arkansas. And if you do that, you can hold them to 23 or 24, points potentially. On the other side, Ole Miss's defense is nothing great. We know that, but they've played a little bit better. They're a competitive unit. I don't know how to compare maybe Arkansas's unit and Ole Miss's unit. I think they're probably similar in terms of talent and athletic ability. And Auburn put up 30, I guess 31 on Arkansas. So I think Auburn can score enough to win this game in Auburn. I think against this defense, if Auburn can come off the bye week with some of that same momentum, that is, if they come off and they look a little rusty, well, that's a whole nother problem. But if they can continue that momentum and that pretty efficient play, I think Auburn can go put up 31
Yeah.
in Jordan-Hare. And so I think it's going to be up to that defense to not give up big plays, get some fourth down stops, get off the field. Third down was an issue against getting off the field. Auburn forced 19 third downs against Arkansas, but then they allowed 10 conversions. So like they did half of it right. So I think there are some concerns with the matchup. But I also think Auburn has some bodies in the secondary that can run. That they do give up big plays, but they do have guys that can run. I think with the Ole Miss players out there, you mentioned Ole Miss running the football. That is very overlooked. They can run the football. Jarion Ely, of course, Matt Corral if he's healthy. They really need Owen Papo back because
Yeah.
Ole Miss is going to run tempo and they need another healthy linebacker. That would be really, really big if he's back. Really big. But what are your sorts? So I think there's concerns, yes, but I think there's some other things that could go in Auburn's favor too. I think that's why the spread in this game came out and it was like a pick 'em. That's exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
Like I think there's things both teams could point to and say we feel good about this.
Well, and man, I even told my daughters today, I was like, I'm hyped for this game, man. I mean, I'm excited that it's a night game. It's a night kickoff. It's a big game. Coming off a bye week, the fans are excited about it. They've got a little bit of you've got a little bit of enthusiasm coming off the win against Arkansas 2 weeks ago, and the fans understand. That the fans get it. They understand what's at stake, and so the possibility of knocking off the number 8 team in the country is extremely exciting. But like you said, there's the aspect of Ole Miss's offense that does get overlooked is how well they run the football. They're very physical up front. I mean, they're not as physical as a Georgia or an Alabama, but they're talented. I mean, they can run the football. They spread you out. They've got tremendous athletes in the backfield. Even with Corral, who rushed for 200 plus yards against Tennessee, and shows the ability to make plays with his legs, not just in the scramble situation, but they all have true RPOs and true quarterback run game for him to be able to run it out of the gate, and he does it very, very well. And they keep you honest. So with that, they keep you extremely honest in the run game, which in turn puts your secondary in a difficult spot. I think, from my opinion, our corners match up very well with their receivers. Where I'm a little bit concerned is how well Lane Kiffin creates mismatches with motion. And with that being said, that the Smoke Monday is concerning to me in pass coverage a little bit, especially on the deep ball. They're going to figure out a way to throw the corner ball, figure out a way to throw the seam balls and the stick it post and whatnot on to a slot guy that puts Smoke on an island and makes it difficult for him to kind of makes it difficult for him to make plays in space. And that's a stressor that Derek Mason's going to have to live with. It's going to have to work out, figure out. Obviously, whether you've got Pritchett back there, he obviously had his struggles against Georgia. Those kind of things that Lane Kiffin, I am certain, has made earmarks on his play call sheet that he will create mismatches, and you're going to have some uncharacteristic play from guys in the secondary that come up big in certain instances. The other thing is too, though, if they make a big play, big deal, let it go. I'm cool with them scoring 17 or 24 points and all 3 touchdowns come on 80-yard plays. Who cares? It is what it is. The more important aspect is, how does Auburn play against Ole Miss's defense? How do they manufacture drives? How do they fabricate points? How do they find ways to be successful and get the ball in the end zone? Kicking field goals will not win this. If we look up and you're seeing Anders Carlson attempting 45 and 50-yard field goals, it's not good. Not good at all. You need touchdowns, and you need a lot of them. And you also need, people will talk about the coach speak of, oh, man, have long drives, sustained drives, keep Ole Miss's offense off the field. I don't care. Score points. I don't care if it's big plays. I don't care what it is. Score points, score touchdowns, and find ways to do it in multitudes. And I think you're very, very accurate in making the comparison to Ole Miss and Arkansas. But I think that's about what you got. They've got some pretty gritty secondary guys that play hard. They're not overly talented, but they play within themselves. They play within their system. Historically, Ole Miss has had the worst defense in the SEC, especially in scoring defense. So looking at that, the odds are in Auburn's favor to be able to capitalize on a defense that can be scored upon. Where what makes Ole Miss more difficult to do things against defensively is because their offense puts so much pressure on an opponent's offense because they're just playing catch up all the time. If you can stay, blow for blow, or on the flip side, make Ole Miss punt a time or two, put them down, get them down, get them playing from behind, whether it's 10, whether it's 17, whether it's 14, whatever the scenario may be. If you put them in a stressor situation, there's going to be opportunities for you to make plays and kind of put your foot on their throat. And that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I will say I'm with you on Auburn needing touchdowns. I mean, I think the winner of this game is probably around 35 points.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that would win you the game for Auburn. I think 31 potentially would win you the game for Auburn. I doubt 24 would. I mean, that would unless you get turnovers, maybe.
24 is the loser. Honestly, I think the losing team probably scores 24-27, something like that.
Yeah. But I also think, you mentioned about going forward on fourth down. I do think you have to be careful. Lane, I think Auburn needs to be careful. Now, of course, Harson's shown he'll go forward on fourth down too. I mean, they did it against Arkansas. And you're thinking, okay, well, Lane's going to go forward on fourth down. And Ole Miss is going to score points, so we need to. But I would say that I hope at times, like for instance against Georgia, the play when Auburn went forward on fourth down, and then Georgia the very next play scored the touchdown. It's easy to say this now, I get it. But when I was up in the press box, I was sitting next to our colleague Cole. I said I would probably punt this ball. I would. You have a chance to pin them deep. Here's where I would play field position. Try to get the ball back in a decent spot and make it a one-score game. We didn't know Georgia was going to score a touchdown in the first play, but I do think you have to be careful about, hey, you're at home and you have a good defense. Like, don't abandon those things that you have going for you because you think Kiffin's going to go for it every time and we're going to need to score 35. So we need to go. Like, there are smart times to do it, but I don't want them to forget. Trust your defense maybe to make a stop or maybe to hold them to a field goal.
Yeah.
And I mean, Carlson, so there's a balance there. I'm forward on fourth down, but don't
You'd
go
much
overboard.
rather, honestly, man, I mean, this goes back to just traditional hard-nosed football. I would rather want to make an opponent go 90 than go 45 or 65, whatever it is. If you can elongate the field for your opponent, especially when you have a defense that is very capable, as in Auburn's, trust them. Tell them, guys, I'm putting my confidence in you. I've got more confidence in you to be able to stop this offense than I do in us going for it on 4th and 4, 4th and 5. I know we can do it. I understand what's at stake. Let's go do it. I agree with you 100%. And I've always been one that says, man, if you can play that field position game more times than not, the offensive football, it's going to be very difficult for them to drive the entire length of the field, drive after drive after drive after drive. They may end up scoring 3, they may score 7, or whatever that scenario, but odds are you're going to get the ball back with the opportunity to have a shorter field of play than they did in their possession. And it just, it's just the analytics of it. It's just the numbers of how it all maps itself out. And I agree with you 100%, man. In those situations, you can get lost in the kind of the sparkle of, and the gambling of Lane Kiffin, knowing that you've got to, or thinking that you've got to keep up with him. But don't get so lost that you press. Don't get so lost that you press beyond what your team is about. And I think in this instance, your hope is that Brian Harsin doesn't lose Auburn's identity in that, okay, we understand what's at stake. We're going to play a little bit of field position and see how that works itself out. We're going to make Ole Miss drive the field, the full length of the field, as opposed to giving them, a short field to work with and automatically stacking the deck against themselves.
Yeah. All right. So what is it going to take for Auburn to win this game in your eyes? My thought is, I immediately go to where's Auburn's running game at and what have they done in the off week to try to get this going? It has not been consistent since really Penn State. Even, Penn State was the last decent, 190 yards rushing, I think, in that game. Since then, nothing. Tank Bigsby has not hit 100 yards since that game. And Auburn has not consistently been able to run the ball. Arkansas brought an extra lineman in there and went 4 down and controlled the line of scrimmage for the most part. That's at some point that's got to change for Auburn. They've got to get back to the running game. I would have said that they could do it against Ole Miss, but Arkansas had been gashed the past 2 weeks and they couldn't get it going there. And Ole Miss is coming in. They controlled LSU's running game pretty well. An LSU team that just destroyed Florida on the ground, but still maybe has some issues. But so Ole Miss is coming on with a little bit of confidence in their run defense. So, I mean, I think Auburn can still win. I don't think they have to rush for 200. I mean, you saw against Arkansas, they need to do it in moments. But, man, at some point, that's kind of what I'm looking at now for this Auburn team is I think there's some identity forming, but now all of a sudden the running game is sluggish. That needs to get kicked back up. But what do you think it's going to take for Auburn to win? Or obviously on either offense or defense? Is there a stat? Is it a certain amount of turnovers? Like what do you think is the key?
I think in this situation, let's go offensively. I think from a passing perspective, you need the level of performance that they had against Arkansas. And I don't say that from the standpoint of yardage. I don't say it from the standpoint of 2, 160 plus yard, touchdown pass and 130 something yard touchdown pass. I don't mean it from that perspective. What I mean is catch the balls. And in those instances, Bo was as accurate as I've ever seen him. The receivers, the tight ends, the running backs, they made the catches especially on the 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 9s. Ran their routes beyond the sticks to continue and sustain drives. They need a repeat performance of that. If you look up and they have maintained that level of proficiency in the passing game, I think that's a huge, huge notch in the belt for Auburn. The other aspect, if I was to look at one statistic, if Auburn can rush for, I'd say probably, I really would say 125 to 150 yards. I think they win the game. I really do. And it's whether it comes at the disposal of Bo Nix, whether it comes from Jarquez or whether it comes from Tank, it doesn't matter. If they do it by committee, find a way to find some success on the ground. And then obviously that's piggybacked by proficiency and efficiency in the passing game. I think Auburn wins. Defensively, the number one most important thing, and I'd say this to fans, they're going to score. They're going to have a big play here and there. Big deal. Hang in there. Continue to give the effort that you gave against Penn State. Give the effort you gave against LSU after being down 13-0. Continue to give the effort that you gave against Arkansas. Stay in the fight the entire time and just continue to get after it. If you do that, especially at night at home, with the level of hostility that will be in that stadium, it will pay dividends 100%. I have zero doubt in my mind that if those kids play with the level of effort and execution that they're capable of playing with on defense, Auburn wins the game. But I think that the crux, the number one statistic, if they rush for 150 yards, if Auburn rushes for 150 yards, they win the game.
Yeah, I think that's big on a number of fronts. Obviously, I think it means offensively they're doing what they want to do, and the more you're running the ball, the more you're keeping it away from Ole Miss. So I think that's a twofold. I'm with you. I think defensively, just have some kind of similar game plan against Arkansas, just to contain them. They're very similar. Jefferson and Corral are different looking quarterbacks, but they're both a threat to run. And so I think the same thing. They wanted to contain Jefferson. They didn't want to let him out, and so that it turned into a lot of limit the big plays. I think it's similar against Ole Miss. You just try to limit the big plays, make tackles in the open field. Hope that Corral doesn't kill you, scrambling. But man, if you can force that many third downs, you don't want to give up half of them. But chances are you won't. But I think it's a similar deal for Auburn's defense. And then you hope Bo Nix continues his growth, right? I mean, I'm not ready to say Bo Nix has got to figure it out. I mean, his career has been too much of a roller coaster. He clearly is playing better football. He's coming off arguably his best game. Certainly it's in the discussion. Now he has a bye week. Now come do it again. Like, that's just how I think. I'm not just thinking, well, Bo's got to figure it out, so he's going to go throw for 250. And maybe. But let's go receivers. Let's go put together 2 games in a row where you don't drop but maybe one pass. Bo, go put 2 games together. So that's a little hesitancy. Is just I want to see those units come together and be efficient again, and then carry that momentum out of that bye week. I think Auburn's got a chance to come out with a pretty good start. I think they're going to have a pretty good first quarter in terms of what they want to do. I would be surprised if Auburn came out and was super rusty in the first quarter. I think they learned a little bit against Arkansas. I think they probably the bye week was good. I think they're itching to get back out there, and I expect them to come out in the first quarter and play well, and that'll be big, especially against a team like Ole Miss if you can get up. And Auburn, they're gonna put points on the board.
And the good thing about it, man, I mean, and you've seen it in your days, and I have, obviously. Auburn plays well with a chip on their shoulder. They and I think that's what you're going to see. I think inside that locker room, it's probably been built up to where, man, we're tired of hearing about how good Ole Miss is. We're tired of hearing about, this and that, and the fact they're going to come in our house and beat us, and they're the number 8 team in the country. Let's introduce them to what it's really about, and let's show them a repeat of that Alabama game. And I think that is what I expect. I agree with you in the sense that Brian Harsin and his staff seem to be so disciplined and so dialed into the process that I don't feel like you're going to see a rusty team. I don't feel like you're going to see guys that are, missing and playing bad assignment football. And I hope that's the case, because you had 2 weeks to prepare for it.
Yeah.
And, I think it's one of those things, man. They're going to come out hype. They're going to come out with a chip on their shoulder and going to get after it. That, really the thing that you hope doesn't happen is that the excitement gets to them, right? That they stay dialed in, they stay they stayed, pretty much, kind of unaffected by the noise. Allow the fans to do that to Ole Miss. Don't you just play your game and do your thing, do what you're coached to do, and play to the level that you're expected to play to. And I really think that it's going to be a positive result, going into kind of that amen corner for the season.
I'm with you, man. It should be a really entertaining game. I mean, I think it's one of the best games in college football this coming Saturday. I think Michigan State play. I think there's some other good ones, but I think Auburn-Ole Miss is going to be very intriguing, very entertaining, and I got a feeling it's going to be a wild one. We'll see what happens, but I definitely think it's going to be one for the rivalry. I think it's going to be one to remember. So. We'll see how it goes. 6 o'clock, Auburn Ole Miss, ESPN. Should be a lot of fun. Fans are supposed to be wearing orange. I guess it's a Halloween thing. So we'll see how that goes. Maybe they'll come out in orange face masks. That'd be pretty cool. But
Yeah,
who knows? Who knows? All right, dude. Appreciate it, man. Thanks for joining us.
absolutely. Happy to do it, Hope. Enjoyed it, man. War Eagle.
Absolutely. AuburnLive.com. If you're not a subscriber, please go subscribe. AuburnLive.com. We'll have full coverage of football, basketball, recruiting, everything that we normally do. AuburnLive.com. Subscribe today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.